This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to return to a topic we enjoy, living a nomadic life, traveling and roaming the globe on a full-time adventure. Our guest today knows all about it. Thomas Running is the publisher of Nomad Gate, a guide to a location-independent life. He joins us today via Skype from Malta. Thomas, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thomas, we're going to start with the same three questions that we ask all of our guests, and you've done so much traveling. I'm really interested to hear your answer to the first one. What has been your biggest discovery while traveling?
Well, there's been a lot of big discoveries throughout the years, but I think maybe one of the first ones and the most significant ones is that you really do not need a lot of stuff to travel and to live a comfortable life. For my first kind of long backpacking trip around Southeast Asia, I realized I brought way too much stuff, probably like 45 to 50 liters of a backpack. That was mostly full of clothing and like my laptop. But now I've reduced all my possessions, both that I travel with and also that I live with. So now pretty much all my possessions, they fit into a 35-liter backpack that actually fit underneath the seat in front of me on airplanes. I don't even have to put it in the overhead bin.
Oh my goodness, that is really impressive. I think a lot of our listeners who may have to check a bag or two admire you for that, Thomas.
Yeah, it can definitely come in handy when you're flying on some low-cost carriers around Europe, or even like legacy carriers in the US these days. They've started like charging for luggage. But yeah, I mean, it's much more than that. It's just a feeling of freedom, feeling of being able to go wherever, pack up all your stuff and being on a flight in just a matter of minutes. That's just very liberating.
Absolutely, especially because some of these low-cost carriers, they'll charge you after, 7 kilograms or something, I think, of luggage and carry-on. And so traveling light is also going to save your wallet. What is the favorite place that you've been to?
Oh, that is really a hard question as well, because there's so many, as you know yourself. I mean, it really depends for what. Probably my favorite city to spend time just kind of living in, I think, is Lisbon in Portugal. I keep returning there pretty much every year for a month or two or three. Of other more exotic places that I've traveled to, I think I had a really good experience with East Timor, or Timor-Leste, as it's called in Portuguese, which is just east of Indonesia. Not very developed, but I think there's, at least when I went there, there's like one hostel in the entire country. And yeah, it was just, we took a ferry out to another island there. Hiked across it. It was just amazing and pretty much no tourists. And then getting back to the mainland, we had to like catch a ride with some local fishermen in the middle of the night on these tiny little boats where you were kind of just sitting on top. You could barely take a nap because if not, you could potentially fall out of the boat and into the water. But yeah, so that was a great little trip as well.
And what about Portugal keeps bringing you back?
I think for me, it just checks a lot of the different boxes. It's, at least for Western Europe, it's quite affordable. Food's amazing. People there are amazing. The climate for Europe is pretty good, among the best places in Europe for that. And yeah, right now I have quite a few friends there as well, which obviously helps. A lot of the travel I do is actually to kind of catch up with friends and so forth, because having traveled for so much of my life, my friends are all over the world. So if I'm going to hang out with them, I had to actually travel to see them usually. But yeah, it basically checks all the boxes. It's also like a well-functioning society. You know, there are a lot of cool places in Asia and South America and so on that are maybe a bit more exotic, but they're not really places where I would feel comfortable living, like potentially raising a family in the future, and those kind of things.
Wonderful. Well, I've been to 61 countries now, but not Portugal. Portugal, I'm dying to go there, and I have a friend who wants me to take her, so I've got to get there. It's definitely on the list. What's the next place that you're traveling to?
So, well, I'm going to Norway to visit my family for Christmas, but like another destination is Madurai in India in in January. I'm going there to attend a wedding for one of my best friends.
Now, Thomas, you call yourself an extreme minimalist. How does that affect and shape your travel?
Good question. For my travel, obviously, like I'm not bringing a ton of winter clothes with me. So I would have to plan a bit further if I were to go to some very, very cold destinations. But I'm okay between maybe freezing and up to more than 100 degree weather as well. And I also think it allows me to be a lot more flexible. I don't have to really plan out like how to move a lot of stuff, which is also quite liberating. But like on my journey to becoming such a minimalist, I've had to go through a process where I've replaced a lot of things that I owned with other things that could serve multiple purposes, for example. And you also have to make a lot of kind of hard choices about what not to bring. But overall, it just made traveling much smoother, much more efficient.
Well, now I can hear some of our listeners thinking to themselves about all the treasures that they own and all of those with sentimental value or some type of family value, and saying, well, how in the world would I be able to part with those? And so how did you make the tough choices? Do you have a storage unit, or how did you decide to part with all of this stuff that so many people think is essential to their well-being?
Sure. So it's actually been a multi-year process. It's hard to get rid of everything right away. So after I finished my studies about 4 or 5 years ago, I did have a lot of stuff stored at my parents' place in Norway, but every time I've gone back to visit them, I've just gone through things and gotten rid of a lot of stuff. And as you mentioned, like the stuff that has sentimental value is maybe a little bit harder to get rid of. But there's one trick there that's worked very well for me, and I know for a lot of other people as well. What's really sentimental about things like, for example, maybe you have some letters from your grandparents or other stuff from like growing up. What you don't really need the object itself to kind of revisit it in the future. So what I did instead, I took photos of all of those sentimental, stuff that had sentimental value, and I added it all to like a notebook in Evernote called Memorabilia. So if I want to look at it later, I can just go back there and have a look at it. And because really why you want to keep stuff like that around is because it reminds you of something.
Right.
But the photo will serve the same purpose. And it's all backed up in the cloud. Even like you're not going to lose those memories, even if there's your house burns down or anything like that in the future. So in that sense, it's really safer than keeping this stuff around as well.
Great tip. Now, on your website, nomadgate.com, you talk about location-independent living. What is location-independent living to you?
Well, I mean, it's a lot in the word location-independent. Basically, it means that you've designed your life in such a way that you can be anywhere at any time without it really affecting your work or other things that you have to, like commitments in your life. Some people think that all location-independent people, or digital nomads, as a lot of people also call themselves, necessarily have to travel all the time. Uh, I mean, once you are location independent, you're definitely likely to do travel more because you can do your work from wherever. Um, Usually, like a lot of location independent people, they all they need is a laptop and an internet connection. So it will allow you to travel more, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you do. It just means that you have the flexibility to do so. There are location independent people who stay in one place for most of the year, and that's completely fine as well. But just having that freedom, knowing that they can just pack up and go wherever they want at any time, is pretty amazing.
There's that word again, freedom. Tell us about Nomad Gate. What exactly is it, and why did you launch it?
So throughout the years, I mean, I've been moving around now for the last 7 or so years, and I've met a lot of people throughout my travels and just moving around who think that this lifestyle is kind of unattainable. They think, oh, if only I had a load of money, then I could travel the world like you. That sounds so cool. Like the secret is you don't really need a lot of money. You just need some sort of income that's location independent. And compared to living in the US, you can live for quite a lot less while traveling. So basically, what I wanted to do with Nomad Gate is I wanted to help people find way or like realize that they can actually do this themselves. And also try to help with a lot of practical challenges that not a lot of people talk about. I mean, there's a ton of like travel blogs and so on out there, but there are like some topics like taxes and running a business and banking and stuff like that fewer people actually explain really well. So I wanted to create a series of guides that will kind of help people with a lot of those practical challenges as well. Yeah, so right now, so Nomad Gate right now is what it initially was just the series of guides as well. But in the last month, I've actually also launched a community there. So the intention is that the members of Nomad Gate can actually go together and help each other as well.
Let's talk about some of those guides. I found them so helpful on your website. One of your resources includes, quote, the world's best airlines for nomads and long-term travelers. We find these days that so many of the airlines are taking away benefits or hiking redemption levels. So tell us, Thomas, what are the world's best airlines for nomads and long-term travelers? What carriers should we be flying?
Well, so that's a good question, and it obviously depends a bit on your personal circumstances. But what I do find is that a lot of nomads or location independent people, they tend to not necessarily have a home base. So they might, more than others, fly long haul one-way flights, so not return flights. And most airlines charge a lot of money for those long-haul one-way flights. So when writing that article, that's one of the things I focused on. Both like I tried to pick airlines that are good value for money, but also that gives you a lot of flexibility to travel in that way and maybe make adjustments along the way as well without having to pay too much in fees to make changes.
Absolutely. In fact, we did an article at voyagereport.com a couple of months ago that a study found that almost half of travelers now are shopping for one-way tickets just to compare with the cost of a round trip. And sometimes booking two one-ways is cheaper than buying a round trip. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I saw that. That was definitely an interesting article that you had. So yeah, but some of my favorite airlines for long-term travelers or people who need one-way tickets include like one actually really good one that tends to have very cheap one-way tickets is Turkish Airlines, and they have a lot of coverage from the U.S. to Europe and to Asia, parts of Africa as well, and it's one of the world's best airlines, according to Skytrax. And yeah, like even their economy product is really good. So that's definitely one, and it's Starlines. So for those who are collecting points on, say, United or Lufthansa or any of those other Starlines carriers, you'll still be able to collect points there. And if you're already a Starlines Gold member, then you obviously get lounge access and all of these nice perks as well. Another one that's really good between Europe and the US these days is Norwegian. That is a low-cost carrier, but compared to most low-cost carriers, they're pretty good. They're in many ways quite similar to many of the legacy carriers that have been kind of trying to cut costs in recent years. But they do have very new planes. So all their long haul flights are on Dreamliners, which are just a joy to fly on. And they have their one-way tickets between the US and Europe and Asia. They're literally half the cost of a round trip. So there's no markup for buying a one-way ticket. You do have to keep in mind that you have to pay for checked-in luggage and like food on board the flight. But even when you factor in those costs, it's usually cheaper than other options.
And Norwegian is really getting more well known here in the U.S. for attacking those legacy carriers and really offering rates to Paris and to other places in Europe for under $400 sometimes round trip. Just amazing fares that open up travel to so many more people that would be priced out if the ticket were $1,000, for example, or more. So certainly Norwegian, Condor, and some of these other low-cost carriers are really worth looking into. Ryanair obviously is one of the very big famous ones in Europe. You also have an article about the ultimate list of travel apps and tools, and I love this because it's so practical. What are some of your favorite travel apps and tools that we should know about?
Well, that's also a good question. Personally, like the one travel app that I definitely could not live without is TripIt. It's not a newcomer. It's been around for quite a long time, but just having an app that will organize all of your itineraries, hotel bookings, Airbnb bookings, flights, put it together in a timeline, send you reminders when you need to check in, notify you of changes, will tell you what gate your flight is going to depart from while you're at the airport, all sorts of things like that. So just TripIt is by far my favorite app to kind of make the journey much smoother.
And do you like TripIt or the TripIt Pro? There's a upgrade option, correct?
So I have TripIt Pro. I've had that for probably 8 years or so. It's not that expensive. It's $50 a year, I think. So it's well worth it for the upgrade. Like the upgraded features. TripIt in itself, without the Pro version, is also very good. It will do most of the important stuff without getting the Pro upgrade. But if you do use it a lot, then I think the upgrade is worth getting. Personally, the most important extra feature you get with TripIt Pro for me is that they will remind you 24 hours before your flight that you can now check in. Especially if I'm flying economy, I always still try to get the seat pretty far ahead in the cabin, closer to the front, and just getting that notification is usually enough for me to get a pretty good seat on the flight. So yeah, that's really useful.
And are there any other apps that you want to share with our listeners that you find indispensable to what you do?
Sure. Well, so one that's probably not as well known is one called Fleischstein, which is perfect for people who do not really like to spend a lot of time finding the perfect flights, especially if you have a somewhat complex itinerary or if you're doing like a longer journey, like a long haul flight. The way it works is instead of going out and searching for flights yourself, you pay them a small fee, and they have a bunch of flight experts working for them they'll actually go out and find you the very best options. And they can take all sorts of things into consideration. For example, if you want to be earning frequent flyer miles, or if you want to try to upgrade to business or anything like that. And they have a lot of tricks to kind of find cheaper flights than you can sometimes find yourself. And they do also have an option where you can like list the best price that you could find. And if they can't beat that price, you don't pay anything to use their services. But if they do, then you can book the cheaper flight, and their fee is usually somewhere between $30 and $50. So it's not that bad for a long haul flight. I've personally saved hundreds of dollars on flights when booking through them.
Great tip. Fantastic. Listeners, we're speaking with Thomas Running, the creator and publisher of Nomad Gate. You can learn more at nomadgate.com, on Twitter at the Nomad Gate, on Reddit under Nomad Gate, and on Medium at Nomad-Gate. Now, Thomas, you also have tip sheets on the world's best bank accounts for international travelers and nomads. There's a step-by-step guide for how to run your own VPN server in 10 minutes. That might be above my pay grade, but I love the fact that you have that. And also the ultimate packing guide for a contemporary female drifter. Now, Thomas didn't write that one, listeners, but has a female contributor who did. So, Thomas, how do you decide what tip sheets to write about?
Well, often it's I'm kind of trying to scratch my own niche a little bit. The things that I like throughout my travels and throughout living this type of life, like there are certain issues, there's certain things that I want to optimize for in my own life, and then I go out and do a lot of research on that topic, and then also at the same time I'll do a write-up. So some of the coming things that I will probably write about is dealing with insurance for long-term travelers, both like primary health insurance, which is like a big issue for people coming from the US now, and but also more traditional travel insurance and those kind of things, because there are a lot of different information out there, and it's not really easy to know what you need. So yeah, that's, for example, one topic that's probably coming up in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. That's so important for people. Health insurance, travel insurance as you're on the road. When you don't live a traditional life, those are things that you have to deal with and you have to think about. So listeners, you just had an exclusive here on the Voyage Report podcast here. The next article coming up at nomadgate.com. Now, our frequent listeners know that we've interviewed lots of nomads before. On podcast 10, we spoke with a nomadic couple, Andrew Blackman and Jeannie Austin, and they travel from country to country. They gave us great tips for how to make it a full-time life. And in podcast 13, we spoke to Celine DaCosta, who runs the Nomads Oasis. She went to 17 countries with the help of 70 strangers along the way that she had met on social media. We're going to be asking Thomas for his tips for living a nomadic life a little bit later on in the podcast. So, Thomas, when did you realize that this was the life for you?
I don't think there was like one aha moment. It's been kind of a gradual process for me. I think it's first, I mean, growing up in Norway, which I think is the same for a lot of people who come from like developed countries where people tend to be quite patriotic, like including the US or Switzerland and all these kind of countries that don't have too many problems. You kind of grow up thinking that that's kind of the best country in the world, and you're happy that you're from there and all those things. And I do still appreciate a lot of things about Norway, but after just moving outside of Norway for studies, I realized that even though, say, Norway score really well on a lot of metrics, for example, like the UN development metrics and those kind of things, it doesn't mean that that's the place that's right for you. Like you might be able to have much higher quality of life in a different place. So that's something I probably realized about 7, 8 years ago when I moved to Portugal to study. And after my studies, I like the last semester I actually had to attend any classes was at an MBA program in the US, but my visa was expiring after the semester anyway. So at that point, I didn't have a home anywhere, and I wasn't really sure where to go, and I just continued traveling really, and I guess I never actually stopped. So yeah, there wasn't like one big decision to okay, now I'm not gonna like embark on this journey or anything like that. It basically just happened.
And any regrets?
No, I'm not with this lifestyle at least. I wish I had realized sooner. Perhaps I would have done more of my education outside of Norway as well. But yeah, no regrets living this way. It's been pretty good.
And you're in Malta right now, and you've published an article called How to Register as an Economically Self-Sufficient Resident in Malta. And listeners, you can learn more about the country with our top travel tips in 2 minutes video and money-saving tips for Malta on voyagereport.com. Just click on destinations and then the country. Thomas, why did you pick Malta?
So one thing that becomes an issue when you're starting to live in this way is should you be registered anywhere? Where should you pay taxes? This is really easy for Americans because as long as you're an American citizen, you have to pay taxes to the U.S. and potentially also to where you live. But for the last perhaps 3, 4, 5 years, I rarely stay more than a month or two in a country, which isn't enough time to actually become tax resident there. So living in this way can then also help you optimize taxes. Like Norway doesn't consider me as a tax resident anymore since I haven't lived there since 2012, I think. Yeah. So, but really, like I could potentially not pay taxes anywhere, and that would be fine. But I like paying a little bit of taxes in one place, and as a EU citizen, it's quite easy to move within between the different EU countries. And like for the people who's looking to optimize their taxes here in Europe, Malta is a very popular option. They have something called like a non-domicile tax regime, which basically means that income from outside of Malta, as long as you don't bring it into Malta, you're not actually paying taxes on it. So that's quite helpful, especially when you have investments in different countries, and it just becomes a lot of paperwork to deal with all these like cross-border transactions from like a tax perspective. So Malta is really popular for that, and also it has pretty great weather for Europe. So it's actually a pretty nice place to stay. So I wrote that article kind of to help answer a lot of questions that I've seen online in like communities that I frequent with other people like me. So yeah, that's why Malta.
Yes, as you mentioned, the United States is really rare for most modern countries, in that no matter where you live or where you work, if you're an American citizen, you have to pay taxes to the American government. And in fact, I think this is an issue I saw covered with Prince Harry in Britain, and he is going to be marrying an American actress, and she's going to be taking dual British citizenship, and yet there was a whole discussion about her still having to pay taxes to the IRS, even as a member of the British royal family. So that is a unique feature of the U.S. tax system. Now, Thomas, you used to work at a company called Teleport, which helped people find the best place to live and work. So I'm really curious, where would your best place be to live and work in travel? If you had to pick just one, which I know is defeats the purpose of being a nomad, but if you had to pick just one, where would your best place be?
I think that would actually be Lisbon, like we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yes.
And it's actually funny because with my own, so Teleport, what Teleport, like the main product that Teleport offers is, it's kind of like a search engine or almost like a dating site functionality, but it's not between you and people, other people, it's between you and cities. So you input like a bunch of different preferences, like what kind of climate you like, if taxation is important, if you want like places with a lot of like cultural activities, like hundreds of different variables like that. And it will actually give you a ranking out of a few hundred cities around the world that we have in our database, what cities are the best matches for you, basically. And curiously enough, Lisbon was usually in my top three, even if I tweaked my settings a little bit as well.
Oh, fantastic! So it's pretty accurate then.
Yeah, you would think so. So yeah, I definitely can recommend people checking out Lisbon. It's a pretty good place to live.
Listeners, it's almost time for us to ask Thomas for his tips and tricks so that you too can live a nomadic life. Before we do, Thomas, I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on whether you think it's easier or harder these days to be a nomad and sustain yourself for life on the road.
Well, it's definitely easier than it used to be. More and more jobs can be done remotely. More and more people, their working week is 90% in front of their computer anyway. So you don't really have to be in the same location as your coworkers for most types of those kind of jobs anyway. And I know more and more people who are also able to work remotely by offering their services online. So yeah, it's definitely becoming easier and easier. Also with the advent of good like team communication tools like Slack or Skype or all of these things, they're also making it much easier to work and live remotely and living a location independent life.
Absolutely. You can write for Nomad Gate or the Voyage Report from wherever you are on the globe. Listeners, it's time to ask Thomas for his tips and tricks so that you can live a location-independent life just like he does. So, Thomas, if you would please share with us your hard-learned lessons for being a nomad.
Sure. Like one of the like it really doesn't take that much. As I briefly mentioned earlier, a lot of people think that they need to earn a lot of money and then they would be able to travel and live like a nomad. Like I've met people who are like, yeah, but I need to have like all sorts of recurring costs that I need to pay. And they think they need to earn maybe like $100,000 a year to be able to afford this lifestyle, which is completely false. If you can find some sort of way of selling your services online or doing any other kind of work, it could even be working in different places. But even just like you could afford this lifestyle on less than $20,000 a year. It's not really an issue since like when you're location independent, you can really control your costs a lot by going to places that are cheaper. So yeah, that's my first tip is that most people can actually make this happen if that's really their goal. Like if your goal is to travel, it doesn't make sense to work like slave away like 50, 60, 70 hours a week to be able to afford like a 2-week vacation every year. Then it's easier to cut all your costs, like get rid of your house, apartment, all of those things, cell phone. Well, don't get rid of your cell phone, but like these kind of recurring bills back in the US or wherever you might be. And so basically you can afford it if you want to. And also, we also talked about this, but getting a remote job is also becoming easier. There are more and more websites out there that specialize in finding remote jobs. So if you're not like the entrepreneurial type who wants to start their own business that you will run remotely, there are websites like, for example, remoteok.io and a bunch of others that will actually help you land a remote job. And for many people, you can actually try to approach your current employer to see if they would be willing to let you work remotely. And if you're interested in that, there are a lot of people who have read lots and lots of things about that. Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek is kind of the Bible for a lot of digital nomads or location-independent people. So I can really recommend that book if you're looking at ways of becoming location-independent.
And you can read more of Thomas's tips and tricks all on his website. Thomas Running is the publisher of Nomad Gate, and that's at nomadgate.com. You can follow their work on Twitter at the Nomad Gate, on Reddit under Nomad Gate, and on Medium at Nomad-Gate. Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having me.
Listeners, what do you think about living the nomadic life? Is it for you? What are your tips for your fellow travelers? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. I'm Mark Albert. Thanks for joining us today. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.